Hello and welcome to another episode of the DJ Project Criterion Collection. And here we're going to just talk about Spine 229, Scenes from a Marriage, directed by Ingmar Bergman, 1973. This was a title that I forget exactly how I came around to actually get it. I forget if it was somebody telling me that I should see it, or I happened at Barnes & Noble, and I think this was another taking advantage of the 50% off on Criterion's affair. And I just saw it, and I thought, I should give this a shot, or I forget exactly, but it was one of those things where as soon as I got it, I realized I probably should have gotten this much earlier. And really the film in and of itself is a pretty straightforward story. It's a character study, and it looks at 10 years or so of this marriage between Marianne, played by Liv Ullmann, and Johan, played by Erlend Jofinsen. And it shows its peak, its disintegration, its break, and a kind of ambiguous, bittersweet, complicated reconciliation. Not necessarily a remarriage, but just a kind of reacquaintance that, again, is very bittersweet. So, I mean, that's really it. But of course, what makes it so interesting and so compelling is that it drips with what I call emotional nakedness. And I use naked in not so much in the literal sense, because it's not really about that. It's not really that kind of film. It's again, it's not porn, and I don't mean naked, literally naked, but naked in the sense that you are vulnerable, and these are about people who easily reach vulnerable points due to various circumstances, and you really get to see I don't want to call it ugliness, but it definitely portrays very in a brutally honest way the highs and lows of a relationship, and particularly of a marriage. And it was that kind of brutal honesty that I think helped define Bergman's later career, his last several films, which I would include in Cries and Whispers, although I think he already made that prior to this. In fact, Scenes from a Marriage actually came during a low point of Bergman's career. Yes, he was definitely he was a filmmaker that had highs and lows, and it was just something that he wanted to try. He wanted to make something within he wanted to make something for Swedish television, and so it was initially designed as a television miniseries. The television version lasts for 3 minutes shy of 5 hours if you were to put them all back to back, and it's 6 episodes, or scenes as he calls them. So hence Scenes from a Marriage, and it was very, very efficient. It was shot in 16mm. Sven Nykvist shot it, and largely it consists of close-ups, and it's basically a duologue. It's a very, very intimate chamber play, and you would think that, oh my God, this is just going to be really, really boring, but far from it. And it's due to the combination of writing and acting, and the reason why I said I should have seen this much sooner, because when I saw Scenes from a Marriage, I could see what I wanted to go for with the films that I had written. the so-called relationship triptych. On nights like this, All That We Are, and Walk in Silence, and especially on nights like this. I said earlier that this was the film that had a scene towards the end, which is essentially the third act, if you can call it that, of the film, where it's the relationship between Christopher and Elena, where it disintegrates, and it's this one scene. It's in this one location, and it's supposed to be. It's supposed to give the impression that this is like a half-night affair, where they spend a couple hours sort of duking it out, as it were, or you see all this tension that eventually leads into this full-on disintegration. And seeing Scenes from Marriage was something that I can point to and saying this is what I'm trying to go for. This is I'm not crazy for wanting to do this. So I think this is what makes Scenes from Marriage so compelling. It's just that brutal honesty, and it was received as that. There's an apocryphal anecdote that allegedly when it first aired in Swedish television, the divorce rate just shot up because of it. It was just something that it just gripped the attention initially of not just Swedish television audiences, but it actually aired in other Scandinavian countries, including Denmark, and it was reported that after the first episode, the streets of Copenhagen there was hardly anybody on the streets during an airing of an episode from Scenes of a Marriage. Then what happened? So that's how it was originally written and made and conceived and shown. Then, because Bergman had this international reputation, and because his latest project got a lot of attention, international distributors were thinking, can we release this theatrically? Because they weren't able to, for an assortment of reasons. It would have been very difficult at the time to import a Swedish-made TV miniseries to be rebroadcast in other countries, and it's all because of the foreign language. You either had to put subtitles in it, and it was that whole subtitle. I don't want to watch a film with subtitles. Why should I? If I want to read something, I read a book. Get over it. Either you had to do that, or you had to redub, which would have been an expense in and of itself. So they thought, well, maybe this should be shown theatrically. So in the it's advertised as a U.S. theatrical version, and I think it may be safe to assume that this was probably the version that was shown, if it was ever shown theatrically in other places aside from the United States, that's what would have shown, and that came out in 1974, the theatrical cut, and it got a lot of attention. This was Woody Allen praised it. Of course, Woody Allen was a big Bergman fan anyways, but this one really left an impression. And other filmmakers have cited this as very important, and for the life of me, I forget exactly how it connects. I can, in my head, I can see it connecting to other films or other filmmakers talking about it and seeing how that influenced it, but I forget for the life of me where it shows up again. So yeah, and this has both. It has both the television versions and the theatrical versions. And I guess I'll conclude. I anticipate going on for a while because I think this is a big topic. When you get into Bergman's television theatrical films, or the films that work both in television and in theater, there's usually this overtly enthusiastic praise for the television version, almost always. And actually, the two films I'm thinking of and that fit this is this and also Fanny and Alexander. It's like, oh, the television version is so great and everything, and then it's almost immediately followed with the theatrical version sucks, and I find that particularly irritating. And the reason why is because I don't see them as one over the other. I don't see it as a superior inferior relationship, because they're from the same material, and it's just presenting the material in a different forum. Television, you're allowed to do more because you're able to pace it in a particular way. And whereas in a theater, it has its own demands. It would have been ridiculous, and I think even Bergman thought that it would be ridiculous, to demand that an audience sit through almost 5 hours worth of material. It's much easier to digest into something that, I mean, the theatrical version is 169 minutes. So basically, a little over 2 hours was cut to make this work. But it works in the theater. And really what the difference between the theatrical cut and the original television version is that in the theatrical version, it's largely it predominantly focuses on Marianne and Johann. It's kind of their story. So any mentions or any scenes where there are other characters or allusions to other characters are cut. There's some minor trims, I think, for the sake of pacing and to keep the momentum going. But really, that's it. And the reason why I don't find this so upsetting is because you see because you have both versions. And I actually like the idea of having a choice of viewing, because sometimes you're just in the mood for one or the other. I mean, and particularly with the television version, and I followed Peter Cowie's suggestion. He gives a little video. There's a little video featurette where he explains the differences between the two versions, and he says that he does not recommend you see this all in one night, the original television version all in one night, but instead he suggests that you pace it out. You watch an episode a night, and there are 6, because it would be, well, one, that's actually how Swedish audiences first saw it, and the other is that you can appreciate more the pacing of it. It's almost like that little moment has its own time to, it unfolds in its way within that hour or so, or actually I think, in that hour or so, and then it gives you, so you watch it and it gives you something to chew on for a bit, and in a way it prepares you for the next one. You kind of wonder, okay, where is this going to go? So it's good to spread it out in that respect. But sometimes you may not have time for it. Maybe you just want to be able to sit down and go through almost 3 hours and just have a single viewing and still get it. But at least the choice is there. If it was a case where it was only one version or the other, then I could probably see why that I wouldn't like. I wouldn't like if it was exclusive, if it was presented exclusively one or the other and not both. I like the fact that there is choice, and I think also the reasons for calling it a superior version is a little bit unwarranted, because Bergman was involved in both. I mean, yes, he created it originally for television, so yes, you could say that the television version is the definitive version of the film, but and also that he didn't necessarily initially think of doing a theatrical release of it, and it was the result of a certain request from international distributors, but he still accepted it, and this was something that he did. It wasn't something where someone else came in and then recut it and did it there. It was all under Bergman's hand, and so this is not a case of executive meddling. Well, I guess while the initial request could be considered executive meddling, the end result was not caused by executive meddling. This was all done by Bergman's hand. It was made for a theatrical viewing in mind. And again, it's a forum that has certain expectations and there are certain not demands, but it's a different viewing situation. Seeing a film in a theater is different than seeing it at home through your television set. So that's why I don't think of it as a superior and inferior. I just think of them as two versions that can, that work in their respective mediums. And again, even though the television version, yes, it's more definitive. It was conceived as such. I don't think of the theatrical version as just some inferior, almost trivial version at all. Because again, this was actually the version that most people, certainly in the United States, that's how they first came to know Scenes from a Marriage. And I like to think from that point of view, the theatrical cut gave you a way to understand what it was all about. So then, when you watch the television version, you go, "Oh, okay." Not only is it all familiar because you've seen it before, but you appreciate more of the material that you hadn't seen before. And in fact, the way that I personally approached Scenes from a Marriage, I watched the theatrical version first, and I find that is helpful because the first viewing is all about getting a sense of what the piece is. So you're writing out the map in your head as you view it. That's what happens in a first viewing. And I think that it's that first viewing that's where the television version works, because you get a sense of how the overall story is going to play out. And then for the second viewing, you go to the television version, because what it will do, it will reinforce the earlier viewing, because it's essentially the same material, and you appreciate more the additions when they arise, and it becomes a nice, in that sense, it becomes a nice addition to it. And I think this is why I don't see it as an either or, because I've come to understand this film and appreciate this film and really like this film using both versions. So it wasn't a case where I had to choose one or the other. I went for both and I used both, and that has worked. And actually, this was actually the same approach I did when I first got into Fanny and Alexander. I watched the theatrical cut first, and then I went into the television version. And I found that works really well for getting into those Bergman films. And so that's why I find it irritating to say that, oh, the theatrical version is inferior. So, well, this is actually what helped me appreciate it. It had a role, so I don't dismiss it that way. So, and then again, if I wanted to do subsequent viewings, I have a choice. Do I spend the 5 hours of a week's time within a week to watch the television version, or do I just do it all in one viewing and do the theatrical cut? And again, it has both. So you have a choice. And it's good to have choice whenever possible. I'm looking at you, Jorge. So anyways, yes, this gets my high recommendation, especially if you like character studies, especially if you like character dramas. And really, and if you want to prove that even even something ordinary and or typical as a marriage, if you think that there is a inherent emotional power and a natural drama to it, it's definitely worth your while. Either version, and again, the way I did is probably the way that I would recommend viewing it. Watch the theatrical version. You get a sense of the piece, get a sense of the characters and how it plays out, and then go back and watch the television version to have that reinforced and also to appreciate everything else that constitutes it. So there you go. Scenes from a Marriage. And until next time, take care.